Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give folks a few minutes to get into the Zoom, and we will be starting very shortly. Welcome. For those of you who are just joining us, welcome. We're excited to have you. We're just going to give folks a few more moments to get into the Zoom, and we will be getting started shortly. Good morning, everyone. We're going to get started in just a moment. We just wanted to give folks a few more minutes to get into the Zoom, and we will be getting started soon. Good morning, everyone. My name is Ruth Zachrin, and I am the Executive Director of the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence. And I am very pleased to welcome you to this morning's webinar, Guns, Safety, and the Edge of Adulthood, highlighting research from the Center for Court Innovation and featuring activists from across the Commonwealth. This event is co-hosted by the Coalition and our friends at Citizens for Juvenile Justice, and we are so happy that you are joining us for this critically important conversation. We are here today because we believe that re-envisioning the criminal legal system, along with supporting youth involved with that system, are essential components of the work to prevent gun violence. The partnership between the Coalition and CFJJ is based on the premise that we can find solutions that will improve outcomes for youth, all youth, that will translate into more safety for young people and their communities. If we truly want to prevent violence, we must ensure that all youth are treated equitably and given access to the resources they need to be safe and healthy. To this end, CFJJ and the Coalition have a shared approach. Investment in youth is an investment in violence prevention, and that is the focus of today's webinar. Before we get started, a few housekeeping issues. This webinar is being recorded, and we will make the recording available to all of you after the program. Please use the Q&A to submit any questions you may have for the keynote speakers or the panelists. Should you have further questions or want to continue the conversation in your own organizations, please do reach out to us. You will find contact information for CFJJ and the Coalition in the event program. I also want to welcome legislators and public officials who are joining us today. Representative Joan Machino from Hull, Representative Steve Owens from Watertown, Representative Lindsay Sabadosa from Northampton, Representative Tammy Gavea from Acton, Senator Michael Moore from Worcester, Berkshire County District Attorney Andrea Harrington, and Middlesex District Attorney Marian Ryan. We are also honored to be joined by the Chief Justice of the Trial Courts, Paula Carey, and Chief Justice of the Juvenile Court, Amy Nectum. And I believe we're also being joined by staff from many other legislators and public officials' offices, and we appreciate all of you being with us this morning. And now let's get our program started. I would like to introduce my friend and colleague, Lavell Fulks, who will be moderating today's webinar. Lavell is a public health professional and community advocate based in Boston. Currently, he serves as a senior program manager at the Boston Public Health Commission's Violence Intervention Program. He is also an active member of the Massachusetts Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence's leadership team on our community council, which makes me very happy. And with deep appreciation, I will now hand this over to Lavell.
Good morning, everyone, and good morning, Ruth. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thank you for inviting me to be able to moderate such a a much needed conversation, if I must say. And I appreciate this task and look forward to being able to hear from all of the great minds who are sitting on the panel, and also those who have done the research that we are getting ready to learn about and talk about today. Before I start, I'd just like to give a little personal statement about my own relationship with some of the study that was conducted. I'm a lifelong Boston resident, as Ruth said. I currently am the Associate Director at the Violence Intervention and Prevention Initiative in the Boston Public Health Commission. And in my journey to becoming in this role, I must say that I have personal experience with some of the situations, dynamics, and issues that those who were within this study expressed to those who conducted the study. Issues around safety, issues around trust, issues around violence and trauma in the community, and how that impacted me and led me to making certain decisions in my life. And through those personal decisions that I had to make, I was one of the youth who also carried firearms, was one of the youth who was engaged with frontline workers, violence interrupters, such as the SOAR workers, who were known as street workers in the city of Boston. And in my experience with them, there was a certain level of interaction and genuineness in some of the engagements that allowed me to feel safe to have some of the conversations. And just like many of those who were in this study that we talk about today, I was one who had to navigate the system in many ways and figure out, what would be the right path to go. So in my experience with just the systems that are involved with trying to make someone take a different trajectory on their life, from violence interrupters, from the criminal justice system, probation, parole, the DOC, the House of Corrections, the various systems that this youth and this population touch, right? This study shows that there is still something missing in the experience of these youth, the experience of the workers who are engaging with these youth. And there's voices that are not being brought to the table to be able to validate what is needed. And so I'm looking forward to hearing from these wonderful keynotes about what they've done in their research, how they've gone about their task of gathering this information from a very unheard of population, right? They're talked about, but not often talked to. And so it allowed me the pleasure of introducing the team that did this wonderful research in the state of New York. They all come from the Center for Court Innovation. Please allow me to first introduce Elise White. She is the, Elise White. She is the Research Director for Center for Court Innovation, Deputy Research Director, for the Center for Court Innovations. Along with Elise White, another member of her team is Basaime Spate, Community Resource Coordinator for the Center for Court Innovation. And along with them comes Anjelica Camacho, who is a research associate for the Center for Research, Center for Court Innovation. So please, I love you all to, just give them your time, give them your attention, and just listen to them in their study and hear their experience with working with this population. So thank you, Elise. Thank you, Basaime. Thank you, Anjelica, for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. We're so excited to be here and to be able to share with you the results from this study. We definitely want to thank CFJJ and the coalition for having us. And I'll say, when this report came out, which is in September of last year, it was based on data that we collected in 2016, 2017, 2018. And since the report has come out, the issue has only gotten more serious and it's only gotten more intense. And so I think it's so timely for us to be able to be here and share with you. So please feel free to use us as a resource, and we'd love to answer, any questions that you might have, because it is New York focused. So once the panelists are done kind of commenting, we're here for sure to help think through anything that we can do to shed light on Massachusetts specifically. So let me give you just a little bit of context. Center for Court Innovation is a nonprofit that does work in New York City. We run operating projects in partnership with the state court system, So reform, so court-based programs, alternative to incarceration programs. We also do community-based interventions. So similar to the Cure Violence, I know what you're talking about. And then we also have a research arm that does work with the programs that we run, and then also independent research. And so this is what we're going to present to you today is independent research that has nothing specifically to do with the programs we run. It's funded by the National Institute of Justice as part of a solicitation that they have annually, just trying to get additional data on firearms on a broad array of topics. And so for us, for people who maybe don't know as much about the research end, there's very little research, actual credible empirical data out there on gun use, particularly in urban settings and among Black and Latino populations. And so, I mean, to really give you an idea of how little there is, the last qualitative study, so the last study that looked at context, that looked at lived experience of people who carry guns, was from 1993. Okay, so there really is very little. And so our goal, as we'll get into in a minute, was to try to put stories next to numbers and not, because so often what happens is you have only the numbers, and the numbers are then open to a lot of interpretation from outsiders or people who are not in the experience and can't give you all of the background information that you need to really understand what the numbers mean. Okay, so the last kind of thing that I'll just point out is that when these studies have been done, they've also typically been done either in schools or in prisons. And so you can see, I mean, anybody who's done this work, and I know most of you have, you know that that is a subset of the folks that we're really trying to talk to and to learn from when we're trying to get information on their experiences. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen with you now real quick. We have a PowerPoint. Okay, cool. So now I can get the slideshow up and running. Okay, everybody can see? Is this working? Lavell, can you give me a nod? Awesome. Okay, cool. All right. So our goals were, let me go back. Okay, so the questions, what we're trying to understand. Why are young people carrying guns? What are their social networks like? And how are guns a part of this network? So we're really trying to understand young people in the context that they're living in and that they're using guns in. We conducted the research in 3 neighborhoods in New York City, in 3 different boroughs for people who know kind of how it's organized. So we did the Bronx, we did one in Brooklyn, and we did one in Manhattan. So these are neighborhoods that, even though the overall rates of gun homicide have dropped really quite significantly in New York over the last 20 years, these are neighborhoods that still are seeing that their rates of gun homicide have not fallen, in proportion to the rest of the city at anywhere near the same rates, still very high. Participants were 16 to 24, had to have carried a gun in the last year or shot or been shot at. So as you can see, so 80% of our participants fell into had carried a gun or owned a gun, and 81% had been shot or shot at. And so those numbers, obviously they could qualify for both. And the other piece I'll say just about the age range is that we selected the age range because the existing research, especially the numerical research, shows that that's the age range where gun use peaks, and then it typically falls off after that. Okay, so our interview was a mixed method interview, meaning as I mentioned, there was quantitative and there's qualitative data that we're pulling out of it. We found our participants through something called respondent-driven sampling, which is basically, it's a chain referral system. You might know, like snowball sampling is another version of that. And the idea is that we find one seed who's part of a network. That's somebody who can validate the study, who can, vouch for it with other participants in their network. They're interviewed, they're given 3 coupons. They give those coupons out to friends who fit the eligibility criteria. We gave participants $30 for doing the survey, and then $10 for each of the 3 coupons that they brought in that successfully did an interview, for a total of $60 that they were eligible to make. So you can see what I'm showing you kind of on the left side of your screen. This is what we call the trees. So this is just how the coupons moved through the networks in the different neighborhoods that we were in. And I'll add just one other key component here is that when we began the study, actually none of the three of us who you're going to hear from today designed it or even were part of it for the first about 6 months that it ran. And it was staffed by a much more traditional kind of staffing structure. And so research assistants were either students or graduate students, people with fieldwork experience, but not certainly not from the population that was being spoken to and being learned from. And so what we learned and has definitely shaped the work that we've done since, and the way that we even think about, it's really been significant for us, is that at one point we, because I said the Center for Coordinated Innovation runs cure violence programs, we brought Basaime onto the team, and through a series of events, ultimately the staffing structure were people who had street experience and had lived experience. And so those are the folks who were conducting interviews and ultimately helped us with the coding and the data analysis and the write-up. Okay, so who did we speak to? We talked to a total of 330 young people across the 3 different boroughs. About 80% were male, 20% were women, and I'll just flag that that's actually a pretty high number. Typically, these studies focus on men, and there are a lot of assumptions about women, and we'll get to them a little bit in a few points, but I just want to flag that. About 70% were Black, 14% were Latinx, 9% identified as multiracial. About 80% were residents of public housing developments, about 35% had children, and about 40% were in school. Okay, Ange, you want to take this one?
So we have violent victimization was widespread. So we have families and friends who were shot at 88%. We have participants who were shot at 81%. Somebody who witnessed a shooting at 70%, and attack with another weapon at 67%. So thank you, Elise. So going to the next slide. So victimization was often related to either gang-related altercations, romantic disputes in the network or outside the network, being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So here's a quote from a participant. "I never really thought I was gonna get shot. They was looking for some dude, and that was in the park I was playing in. Hopped out of the car and started shooting," right? They also talked about victimization, distrust in others, and weapons. So here's the quote. "I don't trust people because I got stabbed before. I ran into the park trying to ask people for tissues. Expected them to call the cops. Try to call the ambulance. They didn't call the ambulance. They stopped the basketball game to look at me." So just understanding that that victimization comes on 2 levels, and it's only logical for them to be like, I must distrust because of the things that happened to me in public, and now I have to protect myself. So this came up a lot in our study. And that's why you see that victimization was like widespread in the network. And now, because victimization was widespread, everybody's living in a constant state of fear. So they always have a generalized fear, right? So carrying a gun, because of the pervasive sense of neighborhood mistrust and a feeling that they could be victimized at any time. But what's interesting about our participants is that they could be victimized by somebody outside the network, informal society, police, right? And they can be victimized inside the network by their own brothers and sisters, right? So I want to read this quote to you guys. "I'm a paranoid person ever since I got stabbed. I come out of work and nobody's after me. I still be looking behind me. I don't trust nobody. You never know when a random person just say, I'm not feeling good today. I'm going to shoot this nigga just because he's here. He got a job. He's making money. I'm making money. I'm fucking miserable. I'm going to shoot this nigga." So imagine having to, when you finally get your first little job in the hood and everybody's watching you because of the have-nots in the community. Now, they also have localized fear, right? So carrying gun as protection from retaliation. So I'll read this participant direct quote. Motherfucker owed me some bread and he kept talking bad on my name, talking crazy about me, talking about I ain't gonna do shit. And when I seen him, he tried to front on me. Motherfucker already tried to back out on it, shoot at me before I even got down to tell my story. So I have to shoot back and I have to defend myself. So imagine that. Imagine living in a constant state of fear. And because people are unfamiliar with sharing their emotions and their stories, that even other people in the community, before you speak, are ready to shoot you down. So think about that type of living every day, every morning, right? Here's part 2. Another participant shared. I got beef. I got shot and I've been shot at. Niggas I done robbed. Niggas I done took niggas' chain. I done embarrassed grown-ass men. So I need a gun. I'm a female. Niggas want to shoot at you. So even through this study, because a large portion of the men in the network bought into the RDS method, they also allowed for women to come and share their stories. Because you got to remember, society is patriarchal and so is the gang. So when we started to talk about hearing the community's needs, if you want to get to the women and children, you need to hear the brothers, and then the brothers will share the sisters. So you see here, even in our study, only 21% of women came out to talk. But it was important, that little tiny group. Why? Because you have women start sharing their narratives. When our men go to prison for unfair crimes, we hold the guns and we protect the family by ourselves against not only other men who see us as single women, but now the police officers who abuse their authority. So things like that started coming up in our research project.
And can I just jump in? So I think something you said is really important that I just want to stress is that often in the research and the way that people talk about it, the women hold the guns. And what we found, which surprised a lot of people, actually colleagues of mine, is that they're also the trigger pullers. So it's not just that they're holding 4 men, they actually have active roles. Okay, go ahead.
And of course, like I was saying, the biggest fear of all, the fear of the NYPD, who brutalize our people and teach us these violent ways that we then, in effort to organize, our community members replicate to one another. So we got to talk about the police, okay? So we have our people have a collective trauma and a collective fear of the police that we share, okay? So carrying a gun as protection from the police, and these are direct quotes. You got to protect your life because the cops might shoot you. That's why I think to myself, why is it they don't want us to bear arms, but they bear arms and they pull out on us, okay? Participant 2, they're picking off people for no reason. So I'm gonna carry mine because I have to protect myself from you now. It's not a regular person I gotta worry about. I gotta protect myself from the people who are made to protect and serve us. And that is the most scariest thing in the world. So, sorry.
Oh,
So when you, oh, sorry, go ahead.
So this, we talked about gun carrying to increase feelings of safety. So what we have come from our study as safe when carrying a gun. 78% of our participants said that. Safe when not carrying a gun. 63% says that. Feeling unprotected from other gun users by police by simultaneously being punished for self-protecting through gun carrying. So what we're saying is the participant might feel safer and might even be safer in regards to the gangs or the neighborhood beef, but they have to balance that against the reality that even though they are unprotected by police, that they are punished when they are trying to take their own self-defense into their own hands. And cannot be overstated how unsafe participants felt with regards to police. This off the quote, I worry about getting in trouble with police or the law because I know it's against the law to have any type of weapon without a license. But at the same time, I just feel like I need to carry it to make sure generally for his safety. Just understanding the gun culture and understanding how that is, like American culture is gun culture in all aspects to all races in America. We can go on to the next slide, Elise.
Okay.
Gun,
Sorry.
okay. Gun use as self-defense. We have 60% reported use in gun and self-defense, or flashing it to stop a immediate threat. We're using, again, safety or protection. We have this direct quote from, I was getting jumped by these kids and I just pulled the gun out. It helped because they just stopped beating me up. They just stopped. We have a use as a response to an attack. I got jumped. I was with my best friend and she's the only reason why I really ain't get beat up. She was on top of me while I was getting jumped. They didn't want to hit her. After a while, they just stopped. After that, I went back over there. You could say it's self-defense, but not at that moment. I defended myself because I went back and I retaliated. I shot somebody. So just the mindset of self-defense and what they have to do for their protection, for not just for that person, but just set a message to everyone else so they could be protected or their family members at that time could feel protected. So we see that and understand retaliation, even days or weeks later, is as self-defense.
And I think that's, I mean, I'm just gonna jump in. I think that's so important because a lot of times when we talk about the issue, it's like people can kind of wrap their heads around the idea of immediate in the situation self-defense, but to understand that for our participants, even if it's later, even if it's days, weeks, years later, it's still self-defense because of what they need to do to keep themselves, you know, have a reputation in the neighborhood so they're not seen as potential victims, right?
Yes, constantly.
Yeah. Okay.
Constantly. And that's the culture though.
Right. Right. And that's the culture that it's so important that we understand if what we really want to do is design policies and programs to try to intervene.
Exactly.
Yes.
Okay. And so I think it's also really important to understand that there are rules for participants about when and how they use guns. So it's not just, you know, anything at any time. You know, there can be, for gangs, there can be structured rules. This is legitimate. This is not legitimate. There's also each participant has their own set of, you know, this is legitimate, this is not legitimate. And we have to understand those things. So you see, so many talked about exercising this restraint. So one said, I'm not going to just pull it out, trying to shoot you for no reason. I got to have a reason in order to do it. Another person said, our number one rule is, so this is a collective rule, don't bust unless you need to bust, right? Because the more shooting there is, the more potential danger there is, either for the person or the whole sort of collective. And so they're measuring all times. Is this something that needs to happen? And is it going to make me more safe? Is it going to make me less safe?
Right. Or balancing that, or bringing that attention, that hotness, more police to the neighborhood that affects the underground economy of survival.
Right. Okay. And so I know this is a little bit controversial, but I think it's extremely important for us to think about as policymakers, as legislators, when we're thinking about marijuana specifically. So 67% reported smoking weed daily and talking about its calming effects. So the two went side by side, all right? So people are saying, I've been in positions where I'm hot and I want to go pick up my gun. And then I smoke and I'm thinking completely different. Like, yo, I'm wilding. Like that shit isn't even worth it. So it's a protective effect. It has a protective effect on people's gun use. And it's very different from the way they talk about alcohol, right? Which can amp you up. It can create, you know, often, you know, it can make people more angry, more volatile. Marijuana has a different effect. And so I think these are the nuances and the contexts that it's important for us to contend with when we're thinking about how to handle these things as program and policymakers. Okay. Angie, you want to go?
Okay. Gang involvement. 88% reported ever being involved in a gang. 60% still active in their gang. Reasons for joining the gang: family, protection, material support, money, food, and housing, love, and emotional support. And I thought that this particular finding was so powerful because oftentimes we like to discredit the gang We like to call them criminals, when at the end of the day, we're like a association of lost people who have felt the effects of the nuclear family getting destroyed, you know? So we are in a way getting together, reorganizing, because we need to bring back the family and the unity. And this is something that the report was able to capture because gang members felt safe to share their story. It shows us a little bit, if maybe we just treated people humanly, that maybe they make different choices. And I love this quote, because what does it say? These people love me. They may be harsh. It may come with this. It may come with that. I rather harsh love than no love. And why? Why? Think about the deaths of our Black brothers and sisters over the last year. Think about the videos you've seen on TV of police brutality. So if society doesn't love us, then we have to. And if society is gonna kill us, then we have to protect our kin.
Or for me, it was like through our research, it was, and I think for Elise as well, we came to the question, even for the gang members that we was interviewing, it's like, why does this gang exist in the first place?
Right.
Like, why does it exist in this society right now? And I think for us, we got a lot of answers out of that. Different type of answers. We're still finding answers. But we're finding a lot of answers of why it exists and why people are part of it. Yes. More deeply and broader.
Yes. And I think, like, to add to what Basaime is saying, is that this project showed us community. Oftentimes when we're in CBOs and we're in nonprofits, we have our own definition of community that we like to transpose on other people. But gang and community go hand in hand. Okay, so these are some things that we were finding in the study. Contributed to neighborhood conflicts. Okay, so yes, when gangs are in neighborhood, there will be neighborhood conflicts. Why? 89% said that their gang clashes with other gangs. So we're talking about disputes amongst siblings, families, maybe other sets, that instead of having harsh punitive punishment, we could do some more restorative justice approaches, maybe more conversations, okay? Restorative justice circles like the natives, right? Beefs over territory, stolen money, and drugs. So obviously, everybody needs space to exist because nobody knows home. Stolen money because nobody has. So of course, people are gonna fight for resources if there's only one. So it's like a pie. If you have a pie of pizza and you put everybody in the room and lock all the doors, and I say, I'm gonna lock all the doors with all 30 of you with your pie of pizza and I'm gonna leave you there for a week. You think that they're gonna automatically go to everybody take an equal size bite? No, no, no. Because we've learned in society that if you wanna survive, it's survival of the fittest, right? So think about that. Also, build positive interactions. This was the part that really revitalized me as a researcher. Because, oh, and just one more, thank you for adding that. Guns do come out in serious conflicts with opposition. And that we'll need to talk about more as people heal over time and gangs feel more confident coming forward, okay? But also, they also built positive interactions. So helping neighborhood kids, encouraging them to stay in school, providing school supplies and clothing. I witnessed that myself because I am a civilian. I'm not a gang member. And every time we came forward, they would always create safe space so that I can sit with youth, build resumes, build relationships. So understand that if they're so criminal, why are they letting help in? Think about that.
Or creating help.
Or working with help to create more, right? So also providing material supports to residents and food. That came up a lot in our study because oftentimes we had to feed people out of pocket because they didn't have like steady food. They didn't have 3 meals a day. Providing materials, organizing community events, cookouts, basketball tournaments, and food drives. When we were on the field, we often had like barbecues and we'd have the community come out, everybody would talk amongst one another. And because the gang was there, it was safe. And because the gang knows police officers in the area, if police officers drive by, those community officers already know gang members. So there is a difference. There are good cops out there who work with community, you know? So we definitely have seen that too, but we also have seen brutality at its finest this year. But
and so I would also just stress that these, so these are things that our team did in partnership with the gang or with the networks that we worked with on site. But these are also things that participants in the study reported the gang's doing independently. So completely, when we were not there. So I just want to make sure that's clear. Okay, so we've talked up until this point really about individual drivers of gun carrying and even community drivers of gun carrying. And now I want to talk a little bit about social drivers. So structural drivers. There are many, but in our study, two really stood out. The first was sort of the relationship between participants' long-term experiences in the school system. So being, not having teachers recognize the skills that they have, having teachers recognize the learning disabilities that they have, falling through the cracks, and then partnering in the school system with harsh punitive, disciplinary measures, being pushed out, feeling generally unwelcome and alienated from the experience of education, right? So then what is your alternative? They're out on the street, they're hustling, they're finding, quick ways to make money, not in the mainstream drug market or the mainstream economy, because oftentimes they're so young, 15, 16, 17, it's very hard to get a job at that age that makes, really it provides any sort of wage. Because they're outside, then they are visible to police, and very quickly, all of the research shows that's the age, 15, 16, 17, 18. Those are the age where very quickly people rack up a number of charges, usually in close succession, and then where? You're in jail, you're in prison, you have a criminal record, and at that point, definitely you're shut out of the mainstream economy. For the most part, obviously there are exclusions here and there, but this as a total, that's sort of the process, right? And then that leaves people still in the hustle, regardless of what their dreams might be, regardless of what their self-vision might be, and their wishes. And so, especially as slightly older men and women, but the majority of our participants are male, when that frontal cortex comes online, 25, 26, 27, people are making decisions, critical thinking. So many things at that point are foreclosed. Okay, so first participant says at least 10 people probably got their OSHA card, right? I bet if we went across the street at this new site, probably couldn't get us a job. Why can't we do it? Why can't we work? It's not that the desire is not there. It's that the pathway is closed. All right, next participant says, so then what's left for us? We got to make our own money happen. And one thing I can say, they don't make it nice for a Black man to live out here. You got to make your own heaven out. Right? And so that's the title of the report. Got to make your own heaven. When the structure is not available to you to survive, you got to make your own heaven. Okay. And then I'll also point out 20% said the ways that they make money of these alternative ways require a gun. So this is not just it's advisable, I think it's a good idea. It's I must have a gun in order to live. Right? Okay. The second sort of structural driver vector for people carrying guns, police contact. For a lot of people, this is going to seem counterintuitive. What? There's more police on the street. There's more police on the street. Why would people carry a gun? It's a disincentive, right? 90% of police have been stopped in the last, participants have been stopped by police in the last 2 years. They had been stopped an average of 10 times each, 10 times. 88% had ever been arrested an average of 7 times. This is a lot of criminal justice content. 63% had been incarcerated, okay? So our participants, and this is specific to New York, and I think it's really worth though you guys thinking about it in terms of Massachusetts. New York is sort of the home of stop and frisk and the sort of low-level hotspot policing, those two things together. And what we see, this is what it means. This is the back end of it. This is the experience for people, and it has just dire effects in terms of people's sense of safety, their sense of their own likelihood of survival, and any trust whatsoever they could ever have in police is tiny. Look at these numbers. Only 35% of participants believe that police try to protect them from violent crime. 20% believe that police want to understand the community needs. and only 15% think that they have good reasons for arrest. And so that means that even when Angie says there's good cops, you know, that even I have an experience with a good cop, right? This is the kind of context that individual interaction takes place in. And it's not the inverse. And that's the thing that I think is really, really important that people understand. Okay, so what are their primary concerns about police? Well, it's that they're constantly being arrested for minor offenses, trespass, you know, being in the wrong place at the wrong time, you know, disorderly conduct, really low level things over and over and over and over and over again. They believe, as I said before, the police do not protect people from violence or solve the crimes. So my friend is shot, nobody knows, nobody cares. They don't care. They're just here to harass us on these low level things. They don't diffuse situations. And in fact, what we see, what we heard over and over again is that basically the way that the dynamic works is there's some sort of altercation. The police come in, rather than trying to diffuse or de-escalate, they go with power, they go with force. And because the police and the gang in terms of dynamic are matched, right? It's all about exerting power and dominance and control. They're just going to escalate. They're not going to back down. And so it's taking what is already a very volatile situation and throwing and just more fuel on the fire, right? And I will also add that this is, a lot of people talked about really little things too that were happening. So we're having a cookout. The police just walk over and dump water on the grill, on the coals, just to create tension, to create and to remind people who's in charge, right? I mean, that's the message. That's really the message of these things. Okay. So the two quotes. So we're out here. We're not killing people. We're not hurting anybody. But when there's people out here actually getting hurt, they're nowhere to be found. They're all over us when we're doing nothing. And then when there's a serious situation, they're not intervening, right? And notice they're not saying they have no role. And that's very interesting because that was actually my expectation, you know, that there's so little trust that they're not welcome. No, it's like they're nowhere unless we don't need them. Okay, the other one. I watched a police officer come up to a situation where something's happening, but it didn't seem as though he was trying to fix the situation. It just looked like he was antagonizing it and putting fuel to the fire. Shouldn't you try to calm that person down versus you engaging in an argument with them? Right. So what are the key takeaways? The key takeaways for us for this study, the big sort of big ticket items. Youth are caring to increase their feelings of safety. They feel scared, they feel unsafe. They know that they're unsafe, to be honest. It's not just a feeling, it's a reality. And so they make a rational choice that the best thing available to them is to carry that gun. And so to me, like, think about what that means. Think about what that means. That's like being in a war zone. Okay, there's extensive individual and community trauma that is resulting from this and underlying it. And so what we have are many young people among these gun carriers living in states of hypervigilance, living in states of hyperarousal, and their nervous systems are taxed. They're taxed. They need support and they need help if we're going to be de-escalating and we're going to be intervening to stop the shootings. They are potential targets of other young people and of agents of the state who are theoretically in place to protect them, and the efforts that they take to provide for their own safety merely serve to increase their vulnerability from both. So what are our recommendations? Okay. Number one, as Basaime was saying, as Angie was saying, when there is, and Lavell, actually you mentioned this as well, when there is so little trust in institutions and there has been so much experience of rejection, of being pushed out and of being invisible or misread, misunderstood, sometimes unintentionally and sometimes willfully, we need to go to where the young people are. That's the gesture that needs to happen. They're not going to come to us, but we can go to them. We need to hire staff with street credibility who already have or can quickly build initial trusting relationships with the young people. We need to invest in community safety strategies outside the police I think we can wrap, it's a discussion, can they be wrapped in at some point? Potentially. But these initial outreach strategies, given the low levels of trust, can't come from the police. These young people need education and employment pathways that are specifically designed for them, for the experiences that they've had, and the context that they live within. And we need to recognize that gun use is happening in urban centers, right? So there's all, the sort of like white AR-15 gun carriers is a whole separate situation. In urban settings, gun carrying exists in a context of street networks and gangs. And if we're not going to engage those networks, we're going to have a very hard time making any sort of lasting structural intervention into gun use. Okay, so that's us. Thank you, guys. Okay, let me stop my screen. There we go.
Wow. So thank you, Elise, Basaime, Anjelica. Thank you for the work that you all have done. This research is so in depth, it's so far reaching. It touches at so many points that don't get heard often enough. And just so much appreciation for myself, and I hope from the viewers as well, and the people who are paying attention to this study, just exactly, the steps that it takes to get to this point, right? Because you didn't even talk about the different things that I read in the study about how you had to talk to certain people. You mentioned the seed, but you talked about gang leaders that you had to introduce yourself to, and that and those aspects, just to show the level of respect to get the entrance into dealing with this population. So again, I thank you for that. So at this point now, we're going to move to the panel and introduce. I'm going to introduce our first panel member, Isaiah Demerol. He is going to, Isaiah Demerol. He is going to discuss his viewpoints around these issues. And for those who don't know Isaiah is from New North Citizens Council / Good Vibes in Springfield, Massachusetts. And so Isaiah, I'd just like to pose this question to you and to pose this question to the rest of the panelists as well. So here's the first question. How does your role in what you do in the world respond to what you heard on the study?
Good morning, everyone. First and foremost, I want to thank the Mass Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence and the Citizens for Juvenile Justice for putting this panel together. I'd like to thank my brother Lavell as well for posing this question, and the team for bringing about this great study with such relevant information, especially in this line of work that we embark upon. Here at New North, we run a gun violence prevention program targeting young people ages 17 to 24 here in the city of Springfield. And when you pose this question of what is our role in regards to the subject matter, guns, violence, youth intervention, we take pretty much an all hands on deck approach to this issue here at our organization. We consider ourselves to be a community-based intervention group. We work in partnership with mental health organizations and other community organizations here in the city of Springfield to pretty much tackle this from every angle possible, to tackle it from the social needs angle of every young person. We notice that a lot of young people are driven into this kind of gang-related lifestyle because of their need to provide some kind of income for their families, because of the lack of opportunities that they have, because of the zip code they live in, their family history and whatnot. We try to provide a mental health support to them as well, because we know that nothing can change in regards to the trajectory of their lives if the change doesn't happen first right up here in their mind. In addition to that, we provide a mentorship to these young people, because unfortunately, Lavell, a majority of these young men that are engaged in these gang-related activities, and just last week, we had one young man that was shot here in the city of Springfield, a couple of streets away from my office because of gang violence. And a lot of these young men have one thing in common. They don't have a father figure in their life. They don't have any positive family backing to support them and encourage them to take a different path. And in our program, we're so blessed to have case managers that have life experience, that have come from a similar lifestyle, that are able to speak directly to the need of these young people, because, you know, for them, it's not, you know, I read about this in a book and I did the study. No, I lived it. I've been through that lifestyle, and I decided to take a different path. And this is why I am where I am right now. And we've had great success with that. We're serving over 200 young people here in the city of Springfield proudly. A lot of them, like I said before, are gang affiliated, have carried a gun before and whatnot, and we're proud to be there just being a resource for them. And I just want to end with this one point, Lavell, and it's that I think as organizations that are trying to spearhead this effort for gun violence prevention and advocacy for our young people, have to keep in mind that this line of work isn't guided solely by taking a gun out of these young people's hands, but what are we putting in their hands after removing that gun? Is it a pen? Is it a pencil? Is it a book? What are the resources that we're giving these young people to help them break that cycle? And I want to leave you with that point, and I want to thank you guys once again for this moment.
Thank you, Isaiah. Thank you for your information, your clarity, and just your insight in what's going on in your community, and appreciate the work that you and your organization are doing. So going to the next panelist, posing the same question, I'd like to pose this question to Raena Camacho. She is coming to us from New Bedford. She is the Community Engagement and Mobilization Coordinator at the HEAL Center and NorthStar Learning Center in New Bedford. So thank you, Raena, for joining us. And the same question to you. How does your role in what you do in the world respond to what you heard on the study?
Well, I'd like to thank the moderators and the presenters who've come before me and who will come after me. I also want to thank you for listening in, and I'm holding space for all those who may not be comfortable with this conversation. Thank you for coming with an open heart and an open mind. And for those of sound mind, those who are on the line today, as a force to be heard, those who have experienced these inequities and have lived or are living through racial disparities of systematic locks and holds and systemic barriers, whitewashing with white privilege and cherry picking and redlining through hate culture. I'm speaking to those who have come today unnamed but labeled. I'm speaking to those on the line seeking inequitable justice for bound bodies taken by blue boys. I thank you for your energy and your patience, and I thank you for the subculture for creating a sacred space for us. I believe the war on drugs has been used as a declaration of war. What we know is that the war on drugs was a war on the Black community and brown people, a campaign tactic used to dismantle rationality and dispense the normal rules of conduct, a systemic parasite that's infiltrated the very fabric of humanity from generations to generations. Lincoln's war on drugs was used to keep slaves bound on plantations. Nixon's war on drugs was used to disrupt the anti-established forces with mandatory prison sentences. Reagan's war on drugs also targeted minorities, launching 29 mandatory minimum prison sentences for drug offense. George Bush's war on drugs introduced the 1033 program, which funded local and state police with military-grade equipment for anti-drug operations. Clinton's war on drugs gave us the Violent Crime Bill and Law Enforcement Act of 1994, which gave birth to the 3-strike mandatory life sentencing for repeat offenders. A lot of the participants that you spoke about today, their parents, their grandparents, their uncles were part of this process and have lived through that. The war on drugs is a systematic parasite running through our communities. It's a long history blaming people of color when in fact it was a war against BIPOC communities and the dismantling of the Black families. If we're going to have this conversation, let it be honest, let it be transparent, let it be a conversation of compassion. Policymakers aren't able to see the root causes and aren't expected to understand the symptoms of young people's behaviors, especially when no one has stepped in to take responsibility for what they've done to these young people and their families. Our young people are in crisis and many have no families to turn to. And in some instances, street cultures and gang involvement is multi-generational, but not all trauma is from within the family unit. It's the systems, the police victimization, harassment by gang units, SROs in schools, custody wars in hospitals. These experiences are traumatizing to our young people, and they don't know if they're safe. Families don't know if they're safe, and minorities don't know if they're safe anymore. These spaces don't represent them. They can't show up the way they're expected to show up, because they're constantly viewed from a lens of crime. They're in constant crisis with the nonstop criminalization and victimization from authority. And holding a gun for a young person lessens the chances of them dying due to the police or gang quarrels. They're in constant fear. Are they going to get locked up? Are they going to get shot? Are they going to even survive today? We need to take responsibility for our failure to protect them and not standing up for our young people. Instead, we place the burden and responsibility on young people who are facing and living through trauma of family separation at the hands of our systems, whether being locked up in DYS until they turn 21 or because they're in DCF custody. The blood is on our hands regardless. We're well aware of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and having family and being loved and supported is a primal need. We know this. Young people with no families and no support look outside of themselves for the support. Gang involvement is due to the lack of family involvement. Remember, incarceration is family separation, and we created that. And if you're broken,
Sorry.
I'm sorry?
Proceed, Raena, sorry.
Oh, okay. If you're broken, the system tends to throw you away and you're on your own. If any person is involved in the legal system, they're excluded and forced into an underground economy. Young people find ways to take care of themselves in the streets, and they sell drugs because they're saddled up with charges and can't get jobs. Let's be clear about that. If you have program support, you're not thrown away, and you're not throwing away people, this will reduce gangs, I believe. They're forced into gangs because young people aren't choosing to starve, and they're forced into gangs because young people aren't going to choose to be homeless, and they're forced into gangs because no one is there to protect them. They're forced into it because they've been hunted, tagged, and caged. We fail to speak about how our very own prison systems force young people to choose a set, and how they are threatened to be placed in the same holding spaces as their ops, how blue boys rep blue sets. We often don't speak about how gang units fuel turf wars and keep them alive by replaying false information to each set, or how young people are pulled over at gunpoint at any time of the day, not because they did something wrong, but because they are a level 4 on a point system. We don't talk about gang lists. We don't talk about how they operate protocols and procedures, how young people are put on these lists with no way of knowing that they're on these lists or how to get off these lists. They're harassed out of schools and public places, both them and their families. So yes, they look towards gang violence as support because of harsh and brutal victimization by the police. These young people matter. They truly matter. They have so much potential, and they're the path for the next generation of people. The system takes them for granted. We do our best to get into the top colleges on the sole purpose of accessing a college's network. But young people have accessed the network on their own, and they've created a subculture with an underground network and a survival system that runs off of camaraderie and loyalty. Young people are able to obtain things I would never be able to obtain. They're living in a hostile environment, yet they're creative, they're smart, they're self-taught. And instead, we throw their networks away. We throw away their skills, their entrepreneurial negotiation skills, when in fact, we need to be creating support systems to enhance these skills and build leverage. And here at the Hill Center, that's exactly what we do. We support our families. Thank you.
Thank you, Raena. Thank you for that. Appreciate your passion, appreciate your thoughts and your empathy towards including everyone who's been so unheard for so long. It's so many people that need to be at these tables that aren't at these tables enough.
Absolutely. And thank you for the Hill Center, because they hire people who've been in these situations as well. So I come from this background. That's why I'm able to speak about it. And so do my colleagues.
Absolutely. And just like the report said, you have to empower those who have been from it, right? And I would also say empower those who have been from it and equitably pay them, right? You know, the same fees that you pay people who get their masters, but that's another conversation for another time. Going next to the next panelist, I would like to introduce to you Ron Waddell. Ron's coming to you from, he's coming to you from Legendary Legacies in Worcester, Massachusetts. So again, Ron, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for bringing your insight, and I'll pose the same question to you. How does your role and what you do in the world respond to what you heard on the study?
The first thing I'm going to say is that I'm happy I'm not following Raena in the second question. Well done. I want to thank everybody who put this together, Basaime, Anjelica, Elise, the entire team who has put this research and affirmed a lot of work through the research that a lot of us that are doing the work know. and then also elevate the voices of those young people, the 330 that you were meeting with that talked about what they went through and were able to put it into this report. To the question, what do I say about what hasn't been said from my brother before and then my sister before me? Well, I'll say that Legendary Legacies, our organization, is at the intersection of developing those authentic, trusting relationships with our young people in the community to understand their situations, and then trying to work with our political and social structures to help them understand and communicate the necessary policy changes that are needed to address these social determinants that create the fertile conditions for a lack of safety. And so I'll talk a little bit about how we begin to develop that trust. There were so many things that were spoken about. One of the things that my brother Basaime spoke about earlier that I was really encouraged to hear was about the culture. And that's the way we engage the young people in our community. We engage it as a culture. I don't understand why it's so foreign to our policymakers and other folks to look at it in that vein. If we were to go into Argentina or some other foreign country, we'd have to learn the culture in order to be able to be impactful. But however, we stand on the outside of it and try to make determinations on what needs to be done without getting close to it. Proximity breeds compassion. And so if you're not near it, and I'm not talking about that you read some numbers, right? But are you choosing to live in those areas? And then furthermore, I'd ask, why do you choose not to live in those areas? And so what are the conditions that are in that space that make people feel safe? A lot of times I feel like we're asking the wrong questions about what it is. How do we reduce gun violence? I think this report did a great job in looking at one of the questions that we're asking ourselves here is, what is it that's making our young people feel unsafe in their community? What are the social determinants in their community that make it feel unsafe? So what we get to do, we have the real privilege of being able to do is engage them as a culture and recognize some of those guide points within the culture. Huge component that stuck out in the report for me was that sense of family. I'll tell you, we have said internally that we are trying to be a pro-social gang. That's what we endeavor to be. When we put together even our logo, when we put together our colors, when we put together our strategies, we included the young people in coming up with this. I'm 39 years old, man. I came in with some skinny jeans the other day. They said, Ron, don't ever do that again. And so there are certain things that they know, the wisdom that Raena talked about that they bring, the intelligence, the creativity that they bring to the space. And so what we're a bridge to be able to bring them into that space and help co-create the community that they're looking for. My brother Isaiah talked about the lack of positive adult male role models. I'll speak to that just a little bit because I think my sister Anjelica talked about how we are living in a patriarchal society. And so even the patriarchy has not only hurt our females, but it has actually stunted the emotional wellness of our men, me included. I continue to unlearn so many things in order to be able to talk about the emotional things that have impacted me and that I'm going through. And so you can't help somebody get somewhere if you haven't been there yourself. And so not only the people that we bring in to work with, and constantly are we working on unlearning some of the negative impacts of unhealthy masculinity for ourselves, but talking through those and having those conversations with our young brothers. I see I have a 1 minute warning here. Well done, because if not, I'll keep going. But the reality is we are privileged to be able to share that space and get to know our young people and love them. In these last 40 seconds, I'll tell you, we just got a call this morning from a young man who was at the scene of a shooting that happened a couple weeks ago. He's been on the run, but he called one of our staff members and he said, listen, man, can I explain my side of the story and what happened? He explained the side of the story. He's got a child. He's scared. These are people. I'm gonna repeat it again. These are people that have families. And for whatever reason, in this context, when it comes to what's socially acceptable and what's socially unacceptable, like my sister Raena said, we throw them away. But this violence happens every day in the American culture. But when it happens within the context of Wall Street, we say it's okay. We report news on it and we talk about it. But when it involves gun violence, because the culture has forced me into a counterculture and a subculture, then we want to denigrate it. And with that, I'll yield the rest of my time.
Man, thank you, Ron. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you again. I mean, I just have to say this to everybody. Thank you for your passion. The the point that you touched on, and Basaime touched on as well, the cultural aspect of it, the culture and the identity that so many in this population grasp onto that isn't connected to criminality at all. You know what I mean? That's connected to things that are pro-social, you know, that we talk about, family, you know, engagement, activity. So yeah, it's just something to think about. And I appreciate you for again, reiterating that and articulating that. So moving on to our next panelist, we have with us Mona Igram, attorney in charge of the Youth Advocacy Division, Committee for, Public Counsel Services in Lawrence and Lowell. So thank you, Mona, for joining us today. Look forward to hearing your thoughts. And please, the same question is being posed to you as well. In your role, how does your role and what you do in the world respond to what you heard on the study?
Thank you, Lavell, and thanks to the presenters and the coalition and CFJJ. I mean, this is just an amazing panel, and also really a lot of thanks to my fellow panelists and presenters here. You are very inspiring in the work that you do, and thank you for all that you do for young people in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I am going to speak from my perspective, which is as an attorney who represents young people from the ages of 12 to 18 and sometimes up to 21 who are charged with what would be criminal offenses if they were adults. I'm at the Youth Advocacy Division, which is part of the Committee for Public Counsel Services, and I practice in Lowell and Lawrence. When I first started in Lawrence over 10 years ago, we really didn't see the amount of gun possession and arrests that we have been seeing in the last 3 to 4 years. It really has significantly increased. We've also seen an increase in racial disparities and have noted that the proportion of Black and Brown youth that are detained compared to white youth is much higher in all courts across the Commonwealth, not just in Lawrence. In 2014, about 70% of the youth held statewide were Black or Latino. And in 2019, about 80% of the youth detained were Black or Latino. And so the disparities were always high, but they are increasing. In terms of the young people who get arrested for gun offenses, and even those who don't get arrested but have access to guns, the primary characteristic we see, like what was borne out in the study, is that young people are scared for their own safety and for the safety of their families. They don't feel safe at school, on the streets, in their homes, and in their neighborhoods. I think the perception is that young people carry guns because they want to be seen as dangerous, and we don't see that. What we find is, in fact, the opposite. They're concerned about being targeted, and they're trying to protect themselves. To use Ruth's words at the beginning of the program, I think we need to reimagine what we think of as safety. In the US, people carry guns for protection. It's an accepted part of our culture and enshrined in the Constitution, and there's a distinct difference in how people are treated for gun possession, which is based on who carries them. In the last Massachusetts Sentencing Commission report on race, it was noted that over 80% of the people who were sentenced to the mandatory sentences for gun possession were people of color. That's almost exactly the opposite of the population ratio of Massachusetts, which is about 80% white. Many of the young people we work with have significant trauma histories. Many of them have experienced violence, witnessed violence against their friends, family, and violence in the community. They've also experienced significant interference in their daily freedom and a lack of respect from police and other people in positions of authority. One of the primary drivers that we see for youth behavior is when their safety is threatened and when they are shown a lack of respect, which they correlate to safety. When we bring them into the court system, the premise is that they are dangerous, that there's something wrong with them that needs to be fixed, and that if they change who they are, their lives, and maybe more importantly, our lives would be better. But I think what we have to remember is that although young people have experienced much more in their lives than the adults that surround them, they are still adolescents, and they're still in the process of becoming who they are. At YAD, the way that we represent children is to be zealous advocates for them in their criminal cases. And we follow a positive youth development model to ensure that we are simultaneously assisting them with their life outcome goals. Two of the most important aspects to successfully representing youth is to engage a social worker. And at YAD Lawrence, we have an amazing social worker, Raquel Calderon, who also helped me prepare these remarks. And also we engage in educational advocacy. At YAD, we have amazing social workers and a wonderful ed law department that assists us with our clients and with these goals. What we find is that the legal system that we as adults have put into place is detrimental to their development. That doesn't mean the people that work in the legal system are detrimental to their development, but the system itself is not helping. Even though, you know, we have this premise that you're innocent until you're proven guilty when you're brought into court, I don't think kids believe that. They don't believe that. We need to change the premise that we start with in court, that there's something wrong with the kids that we see, and look inside to the systems that are failing them. Many of our young people have educational work goals. They want to be auto mechanics, work with cars, technicians, electricians, and they really want their high school diploma. Yet we have vocational school systems that don't accept them into programming because it's too competitive and don't teach the skills that they aspire to. Many youth want to work, and this is almost impossible for those who are not citizens. While there are excellent programs like UTEC and ROCA for people who are 17 and up, there are not enough similar programs for kids from the ages of 12 to 17. This is at a crucial stage when youth are starting to develop their social identities and are trying to find where they fit in with their peers. They need positive adult relationships, and we make this so difficult by instituting mentoring programs that are dependent on health insurance and counseling participation. We need, as they said earlier, programs that go out to young people, like the programs that are here today, and see them where they live, in their schools and in their neighborhoods and with their families. At YAD, although we honor and protect a young person's right to make their own decisions, we know that we should not treat people as islands. Their connections and their relationships to people that they value should be valued. Part of the reason that they become involved with gangs is because it is a group that satisfies their needs in a way that we are not doing. When I get to know a young person, I am amazed at their resilience, their brightness, their sense of humor, the way they care about their family and friends, and their loyalty. These are all qualities that should be encouraged, and we need to find better ways to do that and to honor and respect the people they are and the journey they are on as young adults. Thank you.
Thank you, Mona. Thank you for your insight again. Thank you for bringing your perspective from the criminal, like inside the criminal justice system. And then when you hear things like the flip of the population who are incarcerated compared to the population of the state, it makes you think about what are we doing with policies even to impact gun violence. When you think about a lot of the mass shootings that happen, and those are talked about, those shooters generally buy those guns legally, sometimes a day or two before. But if you create a policy to increase incarceration rates for people with illegal guns, who does that still wind up impacting? And those are the things that should be thought about. And this population needs to be at the table to even inform why they carry guns, to help inform those policies. So again, thank you for bringing that. So we're gonna go to the next question. And Ron, you know, you're luckily, you don't have to follow behind Raena right now. We switched up the order, so you know, you get to go first, brother. So don't worry about having to follow behind her. And so this question is for you. Which of the recommendations in the study do you think would be most impactful and why? And I could just say, as outlined in the study, effective strategies must begin with the perspectives of young people themselves, their community, trust and well-being. Bridging the gap between young people and law enforcement, encouraging them to join community and policing meetings, and continue to foster community relationships to broker connections that could provide resources for our young people.
Yeah, thank you for that question, Brother Lavell. For me, a couple things that stood out. One was investing in community safety strategies that do not involve the police, and then bringing the services to spaces is important to the young people. Many of the services in our community require young people to come to them. We are one of the few organizations to enter spaces that others have deemed unsafe for their staff. And COVID has intensified this level of disconnectedness. These two are very important. All of them are very important, but these spoke out specifically to me and the work that we're doing at Legendary Legacies at being in this intersection, is that we are still going out to the community and providing those services. COVID was an area where, and I understand the risk, but for this population, we knew that this was going to be a very important time to engage. And a lot of other agencies decided to go virtual, and I understand, but we did not. And so we intensified our relationships, we deepened our need in the community. And a lot of that is, in the report also spoke about this, the level of work that was needed to develop the trust that was tertiary to the actual report. So just being in the community, right? And so I'm not actually going into the community saying, listen, this is my program, you need to be part of this program. But like, how are we just being in those spaces? being in those spaces, one, is about recognizing power dynamics in an individual's need for a sense of control. When we talk about the number of systems that these young people are interacting with that are from a white supremacist patriarchal culture, like I'm already triggered in trauma going into some of these institutions. And we see that working with our young brothers. Like, I can't just tell you, go down to the mass hire and fill out this thing, because walking into that space, let's go back to our cultural differences, there's a chasm there that I'm not even sure how to bridge. And so we enter that space to help bridge that so that we can talk with them. And what we were able to do with a number of our community partners is say, hey, we have these spaces that we created with our young people. Why don't y'all come over here and bring y'all services over here before we say we're going to come see y'all, so we can begin to develop and build that relationship. Secondarily is building community safety programs that don't involve the police. Real Time with Bill Maher, I might be dating myself, I don't even know if that's still on, but he had interviewed social activist Mos Def one time, and they were talking about ISIS and the threat to Americans and the threat to American lives. And Mos Def laughed at him. He said, listen, what you laughing? You have to admit there are some people out there that want to kill Americans. And Mos Def said, yes, some of them are called police. And so the fact of the matter is that even though a tongue-in-cheek moment, that as a reality for our young people that we're working with. And so when we engage them, especially from very early on, we're again stimulating that distrust and stimulating that trauma and that fear. It's even been troubling for us. A number of our funding streams come through the state, which we were grateful for, but they involve law enforcement in such a way that they are able to have a lot of say in our programmatic efforts and how we go about engaging and doing the work. And so as we begin to shift and do some of those things, we do recognize the need for engaging them, but it's about when is the right time, when is the right space, and do you have the right people that are in uniform that can be in that space? And so we can't rush that. That's long, hard work of developing trusting relationships, both with the young people and then with our political structures and systems. And so we sit right in the middle of that Venn diagram. And so we are blessed to be able to do some of those things when we can bring our young people into the city manager's office. We can bring our young people because they're going to speak to these issues a lot better than I can. I'm under no false pretenses that I'm going to fix this, I'm going to solve this. The last 1 minute, I'll say, man, we are super excited because we just got some funding from the Greater Worcester Community Foundation, and we are partnering with Citizens for Juvenile Justice on this, in which we're starting to broaden the view, the gaze of some of our young brothers about what are some of these social determinants. And so we have a civic engagement academy that we're working on and launching so they can understand, like, what are the power structures? When we talk about that sense of control, one of the key factors in that is understanding how things work. And so being able to empower them and educate them and then mobilize them to be the conduit and the catalyst to be able to speak to their community about how these structures work, how these systems work, and then longitudinally, can we create mechanisms for them to be in those positions, boards, commissions, city councilors and mayors and city managers, things of that nature. And we know that is a very long road, but we're committed to that work. And so those are the areas that really stuck out to me and where we're working on, and I think would be important for our community here in Worcester.
Wow, amazing work. Thank you for that answer. And I can see why your organization is called Legendary Legacies, right? It makes sense, right? You're trying to create some legacies that are transcendent from what the norm should be for the population you're serving. So commend you in your organization on that work. So to our next panelist, Mona, I pose the same question to you. Which of these recommendations in the report do you feel will be most impactful in your community? So could you tell us why?
Sure. I mean, I think, funding and encouraging the work that the community organizations that people here are doing is extremely important. And that is one of the strategies outside of law enforcement that people could take, because what we often see when we put in services, either through health insurance or in other ways through the court system, is that those services are temporary. So people come and go from these kids' lives, and that's just really not a good way of developing kids. But these community organizations are always there, and they always take the kids. Like they just don't reject anybody. And I think that that's a really important factor. And I think that that's partly because they're coming from the community. These are their kids. They're not, kids that they are going to see just, this week or next week, or depending on what court case they have. They're always in the community. And when you have community-based organizations, those lifelong relationships can be made. I also think that in terms of the health insurance industry, one of the best services that can be put in place for a young person is a therapeutic mentor, or family-based counseling, but that's transitory also. It just depends on how long they can keep the funding open. So those are good services, but they can't stay in place for long enough to really make an impact. And so I think those sorts of changes need to be made. And the other thing that I find that young people are not really receptive to is going to a counselor's office and sitting in there and having counseling. They need resources that come out to their community. And we don't even visit, most of our clients, we don't even visit with in our offices. We usually go out to their schools or their houses or the, Dunkin' Donuts or wherever they're more comfortable, because they're not comfortable sitting in an office somewhere talking to somebody about things that mean anything to them. Most of our good conversations we have in the car when we're driving someplace, one of the kids to some place that they need to go. And so I think that, and the thirdly, education advocacy, which is, a real focus that we have. I think that, young people are failing because the schools aren't meeting their needs, not because they aren't able to get a diploma or to do the work. We have a lot of really bright, charismatic, incredible kids, but the system isn't set up for them and for their needs. And so we need to really think about how that is happening. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Mona. Thank you for your insight. So many touch points, education being the main one I took from that. So going next, Raena, same question to you. What are the recommendations that stood out for you in the report that you feel will be most impactful?
So I believe that bringing services directly to young people is very effective and imperative. But far too long, we've been going about this the wrong way, right? We've been looking at it from a public safety approach, which doesn't address the real issues at hand, when in fact, we needed to be viewing it from a public health lens. So here at the Heal Center, which is a NorthStar initiative, we do just that, right? We're actually bearing witness to this great paradigm shift. Our State Department of Health recognizes gun violence as a public health issue. And through that, we're creating an action plan that can deal with systematic change. Mental health clinics provide trauma-informed care and strength-based approaches that consider the whole person and meets the young people where they're at. We offer high set for young participants, and we're accredited by the National Association for the Education of Young Children. We offer early education that is culturally relevant and responsive with programs such as the Basics, a collective impact and achievement gap initiative at Harvard University. And it's a program that bridges the gap in early childhood education and prepares children for kindergarten. We serve as a volunteer site for the Coastline Elderly Services Foster Parents Program since 1983, which is really important in rebuilding the family structure. A lot of our families have lost, grandparents. We understand that everyone is impacted by this crisis. Therefore, we provide wraparound care services to young people and their families. In conjunction with providing direct care, we are assisting them in system navigation, which for them is very challenging. Mobilizing change on a cultural and community level to combat these systematic barriers, and through mentoring and education support, street and community outreach, workforce and entrepreneurial development, community engagement and mobilization, as well as the 72-hour crisis response, which is so awesome. We're also learning more about the vagus nerve damage and fight or flight mechanisms tied into it. And we're utilizing tools to bring the body back into homeostasis. I think that's where the real healing takes place. We're teaching our young people how to live in the present moment, how to be intentional, and how to live, because let's be honest, they've been practicing how to die for way too long. We're reaching out to stakeholders and leveraging the power of our communities, getting our parents involved in the court processes and getting young women involved in empowerment groups. Our young men are attending conferences such as Ready for Life, a program that teaches young people to rebuild and refrain by eliminating old patterns, harmful belief systems from their childhoods and replacing them with new ways of thinking. We offer young people leadership through transformative approaches that place young people as change agents of social change and movements that dismantle injustices. And we welcome parents and volunteers to share their gifts with us because we know that that plays a crucial role in their healing as well. We're working diligently to give our communities back their power. And we need to push other communities to do the same because having a voice is key and it's where it all begins. Thank you.
Thank you for that answer, Raena. Thank you. And what I hear, when I was like, so much self-care going into the work that you're talking about, engaging with the population, right? Just learning about themselves, how to feel themselves and take care of themselves in these situations.
Their own bodies.
Yeah. So I appreciate that. Oh my goodness, it sounds amazing. So I'm looking forward to learning more about your organization as I go on in my work. And lastly, but not least, Isaiah, the same question for you. What other recommendations that you all have that you see from the study that you all would think would make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you for posing that question. I think me and my colleagues all can agree that pretty much our mission is to build bridges for our young people and to eliminate any gaps of service that many times they're subjected to when many of these young people are put through the system. Here at our program, we're very intentional in building bridges with the community. We do street outreach with our staff, and many times we do get approached by young people, and I read this in the study where young people come up to them and say, I'm not talking to you because you guys are the ops. I don't know if any of my colleagues have had that kind of encounter before, but it's been something that we've confronted multiple times when working with young people in our community. There's just this, unfortunately, this stigmatization with the system, with law enforcement, because of the experiences that our young people have had in systematic structures like DCF and other things of that nature. And I feel that the best thing for us, what we're trying to do at New North, is continue to build those bridges within our community, get out to the streets, go to these hot spots where this activity is taking place, and just reaching to these young people and building trust with them and letting them know we're an independent community organization. We don't work for the police. We don't work for local officials, even though we seek their partnership. We work independently from them, and everything, all the information you disclose to us is between us. We don't go tell the authorities about it. We don't go tell anyone else about the kind of stuff that you guys do. We're here to help you, to support you and serve you so that you can make a change in your life. And one phrase that I took from the study that kind of was impactful for me, and I want to reiterate it, is the following one. Effective strategies must begin with the perspectives of the young people themselves, building community trust and well-being. And I think the only way we can do that is by going out to these young people, like my colleagues have stated, meeting them wherever they want to be met, at their home, at a McDonald's, like we've done many times. Sit down with them, buy them something to eat, and just talk to them and connect with them. Because the reality is, with young people, is they don't really care how much you know until they know how much you care. And when we have the capacity to break that little barrier of trust with our young people, and just build that credibility with them, I feel like that's an open door that leads to so many other things that could benefit from them. It could lead to that mental health connect for them, and that community engagement with them as well. And it's pretty much all about the little victories that lead to the bigger victory. And when we can make that little victory of just, sitting down, getting to know them, talk with them, everything else, hopefully, it's a day by day, falls into place. So thank you guys once again.
Thank you, Isaiah. And just let me say, I want to thank all of the panelists for all of your answers, your passion, your thoughts, your insight into this work and what it takes to reach this population that, again, is not necessarily always brought to the table to have their voices heard. So thank you for being bridges for them, right? To be able to be in these spaces and learn how to, navigate systems and learn how to navigate themselves, right? But also we learn from them. And I think you're really preaching that we have to be willing to continue to learn from them. So, if this was in an audience, we would have applause, but we can't have that. But I hope that everybody's giving you all a round of applause, and as well as the keynotes, a round of applause for what you all have, shared with us today. So at this point in the program, we're going to move to the Q&A. So if you all are watching and continue to look, you can please post your questions in the Q&A. There's already been some questions posted throughout the program. And so I definitely would love to have all of our keynotes join back again, so that can be on if there's any questions directly for you, or if you feel like you want to answer a question that's a general question for the rest of the, the participants. So I'm going to start right now with a question from, let me see. Andrea Harrington, and this question is specifically for Mona. This question is for Mona. It says, we have been successful in diverting 12 to 18-year-olds from the justice system and into community-based programs, but we lack options for young adults committing superior court jurisdiction crimes, i.e. drug trafficking, certain firearm offenses. The current prosecution model is to send people to jail or state prison for increasingly long sentences, is not working to address underlying issues and leads to increased trauma from incarceration. Are there other options in other parts of the state, or is there any work on new approaches for this young adult population? And she says, thank you.
So I think the question is the answer in some ways. The idea that you want to create a diversion program for upper level offenses in Massachusetts, I think is novel. But I think if you look across the country, there are places where they have done that and found it to be really effective, especially when you use restorative justice principles and community-based organizations. I know that in Middlesex, I have seen the diversion program enlarge from looking, years ago at just very minor juvenile offenses, now expanding to district court. And, I think that, we are trying to have conversations about more of that and trying to ask for diversion programs that cater to these offenses, because I think it's really important. All, studies show that court involvement is detrimental to recidivism and increases recidivism. It doesn't help with it. So I think that the question that you're asking is exactly the answer to the question. I mean, just to create them and try them and see what happens, but that to be very involved with the community organizations and people who are in the community would be really helpful.
I would just underscore what Mona answered. In regards to the diversion programs and the community-based organizations, is really setting some, as they get established, really setting some clear lanes and barriers of where the criminal justice system ends and where the CBO begins. Because in having conversations with some of them as a CBO, if I'm referred directly from that, then there's a whole nother level of recalibrating that I have to do to disassociate myself from that system. So it's something really to think about.
Thank you both for your answers. Thank you. So the next question is a general question for any of the panelists to answer. So, please feel free. This question is, the points around caution around gun use is powerful, as often our Black and brown youth are depicted as wild and out of control. It helps us frame the environment as the root cause. How can we elevate these narratives to help reshape our policy approaches to be at the systems level instead of blaming the individual? And any panelist can answer that. That question's for anyone.
I'll take a stab at it. I think one of the ways that we can do that, man, it's so hard because it's about creating that community within the young people to empower them first before they go forward and bring that voice. A lot of times what we end up getting is a space where voices are being heard by power structures, systems. But there was a line from a friend of mine, cousin of mine actually, that I'll never forget. He said, listen, if I have to go to a space to convince someone of my reality, then I've already failed the people. And so the fact of the matter is really being able to create spaces, and that takes a lot of work of building trust with those certain people that are in the structures, and then the young people, but educating our young people on how to go about doing that, and how to navigate those systems there as well, and then educating the people that are in the systems about the culture. And so it takes a lot of work for us as bridge builders to do that, and I think that's an underappreciated skill set. Lavell, you mentioned about being paid equitably, because that skill set to be able to navigate both those worlds, man, is that's a unicorn type skill set. So I think that is part of the answer. Would love to hear from any other panelists.
And I just want to say, just fill in real quick one of the things I think about when you mention that, like creating a space, but does it matter if they come? All the youth who just quit the Boston school systems, like youth council, like they walked out, right? Because they said they just have us sitting here and they're not really listening to our voices, right? So why are we coming to the room? You're not going to use us as a pawn to say we offered the space for the youth, but you really don't want us, right? And so, like the genuineness and the need for like transparency and honesty, right? And really empowering these youth to use their voice. So you just
look, Lavell, brother, one of the things that that just irritates me, man, is like the structures want to do this on a public level so they can get the applause and get the credit. This type of stuff happens behind closed doors, man. Like this is the work for this is not about getting the publicity. It's about willing to jump into some spaces where you're not going to be able to say, let me get a photo op real quick. And so that's one of the challenges. When we put this into a public forum, it becomes exploitive because the agenda is off. And so to your point, man, I just want to underscore that.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And please, any other panelists, I love, like I said, I love you all's passion. I want to hear you all's energy when it comes to this, because again, so much individual blame happens and there's so much system blame that doesn't get addressed. So, if no one has any more for this, I'll move on to another question from our audience. And so this question is aligned with how we implement the recommendations and like who would do that, right? Like, so how do we actually implement some of these recommendations and who's going to do that? So I'm going to shoot this question to Anjelica. I'm going to put her on the spot because she has so much energy. And I'm sorry, I just have to do that to you because I want to hear what you have to say right now on this question. How will we implement some of these recommendations as someone who did this study, who got with this population, but you did it in New York. And one of the things I did want to notice is like, there was a lot of mention of like charters for some of the young organizations. And I know for Boston, I can't say that I know many of the street groups that have national charters, right? We're a little bit different in that way. But like, so how would you implement it in your space? And I would love to hear how in our spaces, knowing it is different from New York and what they came up with recommendations, right? Like, how do we really implement this and, in our area?
Elise, jump in whenever you want. This is how we did it, right? So when we're talking about deconstructing the way that society has stigmatized our youth and trying to figure out how to work with youth and community to change behaviors and to change circumstances that often lead to those behaviors, so that they have more choices available to them. So when we're thinking about implementing, we're thinking about first opening that conversation. Is the formal world going to be honest and vulnerable? about the pressures that they put on the informal world. Are they going to be able to be direct enough to say some of the things that we implement, like stop and frisk, right? Some of the things that we implement, like the sister was saying, the drug wars, right? Some of the things that we have created here have put strains that limit your choices for survival. I think we first start with that conversation, right? And then we get people in the formal world who have duality in them. Yes, they can speak academically, but can you change your vernacular to remember the people that you represent? So trying to identify who those are amongst the professionals in your world. Then you have to get those people together. All right, now we have these people together. This one is into Latina studies. This one is into African-American studies. This is a harm reduction specialist. This is a restorative justice specialist. Start bringing break up the silos. Start bringing all those different areas into one space so that we can start creating a method that's more blended, right? So it's not just saying that the harm reduction people got it right, or that, you know what, the criminal justice people got it right. No, how do we come together, look at the flaws in our own theories and start building new ones? Why? We're entering a new generation. The pandemic changed everything. So we need to restructure, right? So as we're restructuring on the formal world, how do we then go to the informal world who has been abandoned during the pandemic? How do we go to them and say, trust us again? We can't. We have to build, we have to build relationships with them, and we have to take it slow, and we meet them where they're at, you know? So that's where it starts. And then it took us 2 years to keep building.
I think when we're talking about implementing something, you gotta know what we're talking about. Like, are we asking like on a system level, or are we asking on a community, on a street level? And what that implementation look like, and redefining that. Like you said, bringing those who say they in the community, bringing them gang members together who say they run in that neighborhood, bringing who they beefing with, bringing them together, bringing in the church members of that community, bringing in the schools that's in that area, because all these people, even the store merchants and all of that, because this is the people who make up the community, right? You can't say that you want to change the community and have just one part of that working with something else trying to bring change. You're forgetting everybody else.
Right.
And when we're talking about these communities and going in, for me, I would I would implement on the street level. I would implement with the people, because that's the system. Yeah, you have system, you have rules and shit like that or whatnot. But then if you know the underground level, none of that shit applies, right? They have their own system and rules and whatnot. So for me, it's like we implement on the street level because that's where the power at. Mm-hmm. We implement with the gang, we implement with the street merchants, the stores or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And they all buy into this logic of humanity and having an open mindedness and an understanding to differenceness. Right. Because there's a uniqueness in that. Everything is different. Trees is different, water is different, colors, everything's different. There's beauty and difference. So just for us, I think just for us and then the people who we engage with, is just having an open mind to their struggle and where they at and meeting them where they at, like really not just like meeting where they struggle or where they trauma at, like meeting them on the block where they at, where they on the block where they smoking and they drinking. That's where those relationship building truly happen.
Yes. Yes. And I think I'm always amazed that when you actually just let people come to the table and you let them actually share their gifts, you can make medicine for communities that work, not medicine that you think they should have.
Right.
So when he says this is a mixed method, it's a mixed method. It's a researcher coming to a community member who is a high stake community member and saying, hey, this is where my people have gone wrong. I'm a Puerto Rican woman. We were researched, we were sterilized. And they often send Puerto Ricans to do the research. Do you know what I mean? So it's time for us to get together and say, you know what, that is the history of research. We're not recreating it. It's time to be participatory. It's time to train people in the community to do the same thing I learned in college. And it's time for us to work together to try to improve the system. It's not just about a bunch of people trying to riot, as they said. No, it's time for protesters and policy to meet together.
Exactly. And you do that for the ones you really, if you say you researcher or ethnographer or whatnot, your job is to go out and find that who say he's that in that neighborhood, or who's the shop caller for that neighborhood. And for us, if we bring in a report, if I'm a gangster and I'm saying this and we talk on that and you understand that real, recognize real, and you understand the work that we're trying to do, and it's pertaining to your knowledge and what you are a part of and that gang structure and whatnot, because it's no different, then you should buy in. We're talking about making your community better, your neighborhood better, safer for you and your children. And we have no problem with that when we come in on that realness and that passion of I see you for who you are and you see me for who I am. Let's try to combine our differences and see what positivity that we can come up out of that.
Absolutely.
And that's what that top researcher of whoever is that, the PI of the project, sitting down with the gang member of that neighborhood. And discussing and talking. And communication.
I don't want to cut you off too short, but I want to get to a couple more questions before we run out of time for Q&A, but I do appreciate you all's insight on just how we engage in the implementation and the honesty that's needed about what has been done. And I think about where that is when it comes to our community, even with vaccines and medical health and all of these things that people have trepidation with dealing with. It's not about sometimes the science or the system. Sometimes it's about the relationship that's been in existence and what we haven't done to repair it. You know what I mean, going forward. So I would like to take.
Can I just interlude real quick? I just want to also say that it starts with us as well in our own personal healing, and it starts in our own homes, because a lot of the times, being a product of these environments, we grow up with the aspiration to make a change, and we go and get educated, we do all these great things, and then we come out of these educational systems and we go to these businesses and we say, hey, we're ready to change. We know what it's going to take and we're ready to do it. And a lot of the times these organizations are so disenfranchised with what's going on. And I think it's also, I'll be quick, but I think it's also important to create new realms and to be part of organizations that are in alignment with you. I think that's very important.
Thank you, Raena. Thank you for that. So I'm gonna go to another one of the questions in the chat. So this question is, what message do you have for organizations in challenging them to respect the knowledge of community-based organizations who are on the front lines, everyday legwork required to engage youth, families, and communities? And, oh, sorry. I would love to honestly hear from Isaiah on that. If you can just give me some insight, what's your thoughts on that question?
Absolutely, Lavell. And correct me if I'm wrong, I believe the question is posed on how do organizations partner with community-based organizations that are doing street outreach.
Right. So what message you have as an organization to challenge those? What message do you have for organizations in challenging them to respect the knowledge of CBOs who are on the front line doing the work every day? So those who are disconnected, who may, see the work, but have influence in the work, influence on policy, but aren't actually out there doing that work. Like, how do you, change the messaging that they're receiving? Like, how do you challenge the message they have for the frontline workers?
Absolutely. I think my message would be for those larger scale organizations, maybe if we're even speaking in regards to the state and our funding streams, is definitely just to have an open mind and an open heart to the kind of work that we do, because I believe that pretty much every organization here represented has taken on the task of taking the statistic and showing people up and down all across the spectrum that these numbers are more than numbers, like these amazing researchers have established, that these numbers are more than numbers. They're real people who have real fears, real issues that require real solutions. And I think that a partnership or a continued partnership between these larger scale organizations, such as the state and our funding streams, with the community-based organizations that are doing the footwork. I feel like if we have some more communication, some more dialogue, and we're kind of taking this information and looking at it from a human perspective and looking at the causes and the issues rather than just the act, then we can kind of build that bridge and create a greater understanding with everyone. Because I think we all have the same end goal, which is provide, like I said before, bridge the gap and build bridges so that our young people have more options rather than taking things into their own hands. Well, thank you for that question.
Can I respond to that one too, Lavell?
Yes.
I mean, I think one of the things that we need to do, like for people who are not part of community organizations, is not just, respect the community organizations, but really be open to new ways of thinking about how to do things. And I think the problem that all of us often get are engaged in is that we see what we like, if we see something new, it has to be kind of within the confines of what we've already imagined. And so I think to go back to the beginning and Ruth's wording and the wording that a lot of people have been using about reimagining public safety, reimagining community, all of these things, these structures are not working, and we can't keep replicating things that are already not working. And so I think being open to what community organizations are doing means that we have to really change the way that we're doing things, and we have to just be open to that, as Isaiah said, because if we don't do that, we've seen keeping things the way they are, disparities are increasing, they're not getting better. Racism is just a real issue that we have to deal with constantly. And I think the structures perpetuate that. And until we change those, that's not going to change.
Provide longitudinal funding. The year-to-year funding that causes the relationships that are being built create a lot of trouble. So that's the last thing I would say. We need long-term, this is generational work. We need long-term funding streams for this type of stuff.
So, and thank you. And I want to say thank you all to all the panelists. Thank you to the keynotes. Thank you for everybody for participating and engaging. At this moment, we have to wrap up the Q&A portion. So I'm sorry if I wasn't able to get to your question, but hopefully the extensive, well thought out, well insightful answers that this panel and group of participants gave answered your question. If you didn't, reach out to them. So moving on to the last portion of the program, we're gonna have Sanaa Fidel and Leon Smith come in to talk to you about some of the collateral consequences of gun laws and legislative priorities. So I hand this off to Sanaa.
Thank you so much, Lavell, and thank you to all the panelists. My name is Sana. I'm the Deputy Director at Citizens for Juvenile Justice, and I just wanted to talk about some of the questions that came up, like what do we do? What are the structural issues we want to address? So some of the consistent themes that we got from the research, from the presentations, are themes of, first is around family separation, whether that's due to death, parental incarceration, foster care, and the second theme was around exclusion, where schools are as a place of exclusion rather than a place of safety. So when we have young people growing up in these environments and then asking young people to figure it out. But what do we do when young people's basic needs for survival and safety and their innate need to belong conflicts with our gun laws? So in Massachusetts, young people with gun-related charges are statutorily ineligible for diversion. They are most likely to be held pretrial for months on end, most likely to be given adult sentences. And in terms of sentencing, only gun laws trigger mandatory minimum sentences for teenagers, and juvenile adjudications trigger enhanced sentences in adult cases when no other three strikes laws count juvenile adjudications towards those three strikes. We have a lifetime exclusion to expunge records if there's even one gun charge on a record. And for those who are 18 and over, the collateral consequences are even more severe, ending up excluding them from positive sectors of our society. So while we as a society have started the reckoning on the long history of criminalizing and pathologizing young people, it's also time to review our statutes that carve out how we treat young people who are charged with weapons-related offenses. So CFJJ and the Mass Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence have jointly endorsed identified joint legislative priorities where we see there's a direct correlation between providing a legal system involved young people opportunities to get back on the right track and achieving the goal of reducing gun violence. So I just want to mention a couple of things, a couple of other studies that came out. This is earlier, where one coming out of Chicago was looked at giving young people a chance. Those are young people who have been previously arrested and have been victims of crime, and gave them 8 weeks of a summer job. That alone was tied to 43% reduction in violent crime arrests over the following year and a half. So way beyond the 8 weeks of just connecting them to jobs. And another study, the Pathways to the System study, looked at young people with serious charges and why is it that some young people persist in crime and young people desist from crime. And all of them have been charged with serious offenses. And what they found is there were two main factors. They looked at everything: age, race, geography, income, mental health, substance abuse, all sorts of things. They nailed it down to two issues. One is the belief in the legitimacy of authority. So many of our panelists in the research studies talked about those in authority. Do they treat young people fairly? Is there a perception or an actual treatment of fairness? And when that trust in authority, that belief in legitimacy of authority, that undermines also that sense of safety for young people. So in Massachusetts, according to a Harvard law study of racial disparities in our courts, it said that the one factor, racial and ethnic differences in the type and severity of the initial charge, accounts for over 70% of the disparities in the length of sentences. So that means young people, and even though the study only looked at adult sentencing, this also there is a correlation to also the young people in the juvenile system. The second one is helping young people meet their adolescent developmental milestones. So those who desist from crime are able to move on and reach those developmental milestones in maturity, social maturity, a connection to, and those are tied to connection to adults, a stable adult, a connection to education, employment, physical and mental health, and connection to community. So when we see that things that bar young people from reaching those developmental milestones actually is tied to persistence in crime. And what we heard today reaffirms all of that understanding. So with those values in mind, CFJJ and the coalition have jointly endorsed 3 bills that reorient our legal system toward working with young people, including those with weapons charges. So Representative Fulker Oakley and Senator Cream filed a juvenile diversion bill, expanding judicial diversion. Representative O'Day and Senator Van Corey filed legislation to raise the age at which a young person is automatically prosecuted and as an adult from 18 to the age of 21. Representative Decker and Senator Cream filed legislation to expand expungement, looking at this lifetime exclusion on offenses. Additionally, CFJJ is working alongside the coalition of other advocates to tackle the use of juvenile adjudications in triggering enhanced adult mandatory minimum sentences. So while Massachusetts 3 strikes law expressly excludes a defendant's juvenile record, our statute makes a clear exception to that principle when related to cases involving weapons charges. And this was highlighted in an SJC case where an 18-year-old whose offense carried a 1.5 year mandatory minimum sentence, but because our state law says if you've had drug or weapons-related charges as a juvenile, those charges can enhance sentences. So in this case, 2 weapons-related charges led to enhancing that sentence from a 1.5 year to 10-year mandatory minimum sentence in a state prison. So bill tackling that was filed by Representative Miranda and Senator Eldridge. So we look forward to working with you all in this legislative session to advance some of these policies. And I'm going to turn it on to Leon to close it up from there.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Leon Smith, and I'm the Executive Director at Citizens for Juvenile Justice. And I'd just like to take a moment to show heartfelt appreciation to everyone who is a part of making this event possible today. I want to thank our keynote speakers from the Center for Court Innovation. Their phenomenal research and programming doesn't just impact lives in New York City, but provides a shining example and models of best practices for other jurisdictions as well, as we've seen here today. I really want to thank all of our panelists, Mona, Ron, Raena, and Isaiah, for the amazing work that you do with and on behalf of our young people. You know, often in juvenile justice circles, we spend a lot of time talking about young people at the front end of the system, those with low-level offenses that we should be keeping out. And yes, that's very important. But your work really makes it clear, along with the study, that those young people who do have serious cases, those young people who do have gun cases, those young people who aren't at the deep end of the system, they matter too. They're just as important, and they are equally deserving of our support, our compassion, our understanding, and our empathy. I want to thank Lavell so much for taking time out of your schedule to be with us today, and for the fantastic job you did as a moderator. And last but not least, I want to thank Grace from CFJJ and Emily from the Mass Coalition for all the amazing work you've been doing behind the scenes today to ensure that this event goes smoothly. Lastly, I want to encourage everyone who's still on this call, please visit the website and follow the social media of both CFJJ and the Mass Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence in order to continue this conversation, as well as track advocacy on some of the systemic reforms that Senna just mentioned. At CFJJ, you can find us at www.cfjj.org, and the Mass Coalition website is mapreventgunviolence.com. And with that, that brings us to the end of our forum today. And in concluding, I want to say is, yes, we hope that you were informed by the presentation and the conversation today. But I believe it's more important that we take this information and we allow it to energize us towards not just advocating for, but agitating for reform for our young people in order to make these situations better. And with that, I thank you all so much for coming, and I hope that you have a good evening.